Like I say, I used to have this thing where I would test out my sub commanders basically, and where they would go and they would identify a ship. The final test, the final sub test after they could run the sub and dive with the sub was to basically go out alone and go and identify this one ship and then shoot a torpedo at it. And the people would be sitting on board the ship and would actually register that the torpedo hit the hull and all that other stuff by a big dong, and then basically you pass the test, and then you dive, and then you go back home. Basically, you're not actually supposed to destroy the ship. You're supposed to just shoot a torpedo at it, and that's that. And they knew this, and all that other stuff. So, and then after that, you're given another sub and a much newer sub. Not that much newer, but a much better. It could actually dive more and all that other stuff. And then you're sent out, but you're tracked basically. And you still have 10. What you don't know is that you're told that people, my cadets were told that those were duds and those were practice ones, but the new ones that they now got were going to be the real and fully armed ones. Okay, so then they would go out into the world basically, and they would spend about well, it depends. Certain sub crews would just be cut loose, and other sub crews would have a senior officer on board. Anyway, so then the subs were cruising around basically, and they were still tracked because the sub people would be told that the subs couldn't go any deeper than 400 feet. So, and a sub that's within 100 and 400 feet of the surface can actually be seen by an aircraft. So we'd still know where they were. So anyway, and they would actually be tracked all over the ocean, basically wherever they went, and they'd be told to go patrol, blah blah blah, and we would just watch them. And they wouldn't know that they had 10 dud warheads until they tried to use one. So anyway, basically, about there were probably 3 or 4 teams that actually went out there and actually fired off. Actually, they started harassing people in Hong Kong first. They took the sub. They actually took the sub. They were like, oh, well, I guess no one's watching us. And they actually took the sub to Hong Kong, and they were harassing people in Hong Kong. And I think they shot some people. And what I'm actually talking about is Nixon, JFK, Jimmy Carter, and all these other people. Basically got on a sub and were basically harassing people in Hong Kong. And then they also went out and they tried... I don't know. Something went wrong. Something went bad, and they tried to blow up another sub. And they finally they fired a torpedo, and of course it was a dud. And they're like, they eventually fired all 12 torpedoes. It gets kind of complicated, but basically, we knew that Nixon and JFK and some of the other ones were psychotic maniacs, pretty much, because they had gotten into the sub program, and they had stolen the sub. And they were like, no, it wasn't us, blah, blah. But we had actually been tracking them all over the ocean, so we knew exactly where they were. And we knew that they were homicidal maniacs before they ever were really able to hurt anyone. Later on in life, they finally got another submarine or something. I think they killed a crew in Japan or whatever, or locked up a crew, something or other. But anyway, we basically the rest of the world, we knew exactly who they were. Germany knew who they were. Everyone really knew who they were because they had failed my subtest. It was a 2-part subtest, where the first part was what's called, and if you did good for about a year, you'd be given a better sub. But they didn't know any of these other rules. They didn't know that they were still being tracked, blah blah, and this and that, of course. Anyway, so a few people got kicked out of the sub program. I believe it was Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon, and a few of the other people basically banded together, and they basically started pirating, and pretty much the whole world knew about them, because they knew about my sub thing. Because all the high command people, the real government people from China to Germany to probably Russia knew about my sub test, pretty much. Because it was done exactly, I was paying for it, and it was done exactly as I wanted it done. So pretty much we knew that these people were homicidal maniacs before they ever came along, because they failed my test. There's always a test. And Anyway, later on, though, there's a lot of other stuff that gets complicated, but basically there was a sub-test, and I didn't have the same test for a battle. Well, the battleships were basically, they eventually take over a battleship, and they actually start shelling towns and cities and all that other stuff. But mostly the battleships were just used for Panama and building some other roads and basically shooting, breaking through hard solid rock, pretty much. They would ram a shell into it, pretty much. Not for actually shelling people. But at some point in time, there are some rogue ships. Anyway, and they have to be taken out. So anyway, it gets kind of complicated, and then there's a whole bunch of liars that lie to the world. But basically, pretty much the world knew exactly who these people were, if they had known anything about White Star Line. So anyway, yeah, my sub-test and my duds, because I invented modern day warfare, and I invented the torpedoes. So they were getting their torpedoes from me, and I directed it to be done a certain way to kind of weed out any problem people. Anyway, eventually they go run wild anyway, and they I think they do actually sink quite a few ships and actually steal some war aircraft and all that other stuff. But pretty much we knew who they were the whole time because they had failed all my tests. The sub test and there's some other tests. So pretty much we knew exactly who they were the whole time, pretty much. So getting to them wasn't all that hard. So anyway, when they particularly failed the sub-test, that's when we were tipped off. So because that sub-test was mine, because I owned all the subs. So anyway, and the subs actually were being tracked the whole time too. Germany had tracking devices on them, and that was another thing. There was a radio tracker on the subs the whole time, and basically they didn't know that they were being tracked through a radio signal. I think the subs were always giving off a radio signal or something, or where they'd go beep or something like that in a radio wave, and it could actually be tracked. So we knew where they were the whole time. So anyway, and there's also a plotter, I believe, too, that would also try and plot their position. I think it plotted like speed and also rudder position or something. We were doing like a rudimentary black box for the subs as well. So pretty much we knew where they were. All we had to do was get back on board the sub, and we could tell where they were. So anyway, of course, I always had tests and securities and all that other stuff. I was, I'm always triple redundant, very safe, very careful. So basically, we knew about Trump, or not Trump, I mean JFK and Richard Nixon and some of the other ones from that. Anyway, so they were so caught because it was a test, of course. It wasn't just a training program. But anyway, so pretty much, yeah. Anyway, and they would have done a lot more damage, but we were kind of tipped off. So anyway, and most people didn't want to kill people. So, but they would have killed a lot more people if they could have, because they didn't really care.